And I want to read from Exodus chapter 34. You can open it up in your Bibles in a Bible app. We'll also have it up here on the screens. But we're about to read actually a very important passage of Scripture. This passage is one of the big ones. Sometimes it's described as the John 3:16 of the Old Testament. You know, everybody knows John 3:16. Everybody's seen it. Everybody's heard it. We're going to read one, this is a big deal. This is actually, Exodus 34, what we're about to read, is actually the most quoted verse in the Bible, by the Bible. It's the verse that the Bible itself goes back to most often. It quotes most often. It points back to most often. And it's a big deal because it is God making an introduction of himself. He is introducing himself to, here in the story, a guy named Moses and eventually to the world. So let's go ahead and let's read it. Exodus chapter 34. We start in verse 5. And it says, "Then the Lord came down in the cloud and stood there with him." This is talking about Moses. He's standing there with Moses and proclaimed his name. Before, when God introduced himself, it was kind of funny. They were asking God, "Who are you?" And he said, "I am." Okay, who are you? I am who I am. I am the I am. Huh? All right. And so then we get here, then he proclaimed his name. It's getting a little more personal here. It's getting a little clearer than I am the I am. It goes on. And he passed in front of Moses, proclaiming the Lord, or Yahweh, the Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands, and forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. So today I want to preach a message to you, and I want to title it today, God is compassionate and gracious. I want to take a look at how he begins this introduction of himself to you, me, to Moses, to the world. He starts with these two words, God is compassionate and gracious. See, we're doing this series because how you perceive God affects how you relate to God. See, I love having moments of being able to connect with my mom and hear some of her story and hear about her life as she grew up and in Mexico. And I love it when she tells me about the food. You see her face light up when she tells you about the food in Mexico. And it's not rice and beans and burritos, okay? It's not Taco Bell. But you see her face absolutely light up when she talks about the food or when she talks about the beaches. In her own words, the Oregon coast is not a beach. It's a fake beach. She'll talk about just like real beaches. And she talks about her experience of going to them and seeing them and just some of her experiences in Mexico. And this last time, a few weeks ago, we got to sit down and she got to tell me a little bit more in detail about a specific period of her life that was actually kind of difficult. And in this season of my mother's life, she was going through a very difficult time. And essentially, she had absent parents, very difficult home life. And there's details and stuff that she was going through, but as she was telling this story, and she was telling me about these few years of her life, she said something that was really interesting. She said, she was telling me about how difficult it was and how much it weighed on her and how this season was horrible. She called it her hell. And then in the middle of it, she said, and I would look around and I would stop, and I was a young girl and no one ever told me about God. No one ever talked about God. And I would just think of my life and how horrible it is. And I would think, man, maybe I should pray. Maybe I should talk to God about it. And then she said, I would look around and I would look at other people, and they must have all these issues, all these things that they talk to God about, all of these things that they constantly bring to God. And I would think to myself, and this is what she said, why would God have time for me? So I didn't pray. I would never go to God. And in the room is, honestly, we come from all different backgrounds, all different life experiences. You might be here and you might be a Christian. You might not be a Christian, but the reality is we all have thoughts about God. Whether we know it or not, we all think things about God. We all perceive God in certain ways. And you can think about it that there is so many different thoughts about God. There are so many ways, there's so many different people that think so many different things about who God is. And you could say it must be impossible if everybody has different thoughts and ideas, and my mom saw God this way, but somebody else sees God this way. It's impossible to fully know God. How can I tell my mom for certain who God is? How can you know God? It must be impossible to fully know him. And to that I would say, on one side, you're probably right. It is impossible for us to fully know God, or else he would not be God. But I also have to say to that does not mean that there aren't better and worse ideas about who God is. I got to say that again. That does not mean that in the world, in the multiplicity of ideas, of thoughts, of perspectives of who God is, there are more faithful and accurate ways to describe God than others. Not all are equally accurate. Because the beautiful thing about this God, the God of the scriptures, is that he wants to be known, is that he wants to reveal himself. He wants you and I to know him. And so in this revelation, in Exodus 34, this is God's self-revelation. This is his self-identification. He is beginning here to tell you and me who he is. So I want to look at compassionate, how he begins. And he begins with compassionate and gracious. So I want to take a moment and I want to look at one of the stories in the Bible that quotes back to this verse, that points back to this introduction of God, as to who God is, as to why God does what he does in the story. So let's flip over to the book of Jonah. Jonah chapter 1. We're going to put it up here on the screen. And you might be familiar with Jonah because, Jonah gets swallowed by a huge fish. You might be familiar with the fish ordeal. But the truth is, this is a masterpiece. And what it's trying to do is it is painting a picture, a beautiful picture of who God is. So let me read it to you. I'm going to read the first 3 verses, and it basically sets out the whole story. It lays out what the whole story is about, what this entire thing is about. So Jonah chapter 1, verse 3, it says, "The word of the Lord came to Jonah." So God is speaking to a guy named Jonah, son of Amittai. This is what God says to Jonah. He says, "Go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it, because its wickedness has come up before me. But Jonah, and I love this is so good. But Jonah ran away from the Lord and headed for Tarshish. Now, if you're like seeing this on a map, it kind of paints the picture for you. Literally, Nineveh, straight to the right. Tarshish, straight to the left. He is literally going completely, exactly the opposite way of where God had told him to go. So he says he head straight to Tarshish. He went down to Joppa, where he found a ship bound for that port. After paying the fare, he went aboard and sailed for Tarshish to flee from the Lord. So God speaks to a guy named Jonah, and he says, go and preach to a great city of Nineveh. And he runs. But see, what you got to know is Nineveh, if you're reading the story, if you're reading the Old Testament, you would know, one, Nineveh is the capital of this one nation called Assyria. And if you read the story, you would know that this name Assyria keeps popping up over and over again. You're reading 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, you're reading Chronicles, you're reading all of these stories in the Old Testament that Assyria is popping up again, Assyria is popping up again, Assyria is popping up again. And you're seeing a little bit of a pattern here. And the pattern is that Assyria is always almost in constant war with Jonah and his people, the Israelites. They are in constant battle. And you read it over and over and over again. Assyria, they're fighting again. Assyria, they're doing something horrible again. Assyria, they're battling again. They're warring again. Over and over and over again. And then, so imagine yourself, you're reading this story. And Israel, the people of Jonah, they have enemies. They are in constant war and battle with these people of Assyria. And you're reading this over and over again in constant war and battle, and they become enemies, and they hate each other. And then you flip to the book of Jonah, page 1. God says, Jonah, go preach there. And it's kind of a moment. It's like kind of unexpected. If you're following the story, you're like, wait. What? It's a little bit of a moment in the story here. God is asking Jonah, go and preach to your greatest enemy. Go and preach to the people that hate you the most. Have fun. God bless. So now Jonah's response makes a little bit more sense, doesn't it? He's like, no thanks. Straight left. But the truth is, that actually wasn't the full reason why Jonah ran. Something else that you have to know that is helpful to know is Nineveh is historically known for being a very, very violent place. The truth is, in the British Museum a few years ago, they had an installation of tablets, real tablets, that were recovered from the Assyrians from about as far back as 900 BC. And they were on display in the British Museum. And these tablets and this whole display was talked about by publications as being some of the most appalling art ever created. You would have on some of these tablets pictures and descriptions of the way that these Assyrian kings, what they would do to people. They would talk about having mountains of heads. They would talk about, there was a tablet that had a drawing of a king filleting a person. They would describe covering the walls of their city with the flesh of people. On one of these tablets, that had the king of Nineveh on the right. And this was supposed to be a peaceful, relaxing, uplifting piece of art. You have the king of Nineveh on the right. And he's in a famous garden in Nineveh. There was a big, beautiful, famous garden in the city of Nineveh. And he was relaxing and he was taking a drink and there was trees and it was just in a beautiful garden. And then on the other side, on the left side of the picture, there was heads hanging from trees. Or there's descriptions on one tablet that talked about Assyrians forcing people to grind the bones of their fathers before killing them on the streets of Nineveh. This is real. And to these people, God says, go. And Jonah's reaction makes a little more sense, doesn't it? But the truth is, that wasn't the full reason why he fled. We actually don't get the full reason why Jonah ran away until the very end of the story. Can I read it to you? So Jonah, after the whole fish ordeal, spends 3 days, 3 nights in the belly of a fish. God ends up winning. He goes to Nineveh. He arrives at Nineveh. He preaches to Nineveh. And something incredible happens. This is actually an incredible historical moment. Nineveh repents. They turn from what they were doing. And can I read it to you? It says, Jonah, chapter 3. He says, when God saw what they did and how they turned from their evil ways, he relented and did not bring on them the destruction he had threatened. And it goes on. It gets better. It goes good. The very next verse says, but to Jonah, this seemed very wrong, and he became angry. And he prayed to the Lord, isn't this what I said, Lord? When I was still at home, that is what I tried to forestall by fleeing directly left. I knew, and here's the quote, Exodus 34, I knew that you are a gracious and compassionate God, slow to anger and abounding in love, a God who relents from sending calamity. Jonah ran away because he knew that God is gracious and compassionate to his core. That he knew that God was gracious and compassionate even to his enemies, even to people that were violent. That this is who God is and he does not change. God is gracious and compassionate. That is who he is. And this means so much to how you and I relate to God, to how we see God. So can I give you a couple things that I want you to take with you today from these verses? Yeah? You with me? The first thing I'd love for you to take with you is God is moved by compassion for us. God is moved by compassion for us. The word compassion in all of these verses is the word rahum. And what this idea conveys is it conveys being deeply moved. It conveys this idea of a deep compassion and mercy. It's this idea of being just moved from the deepest parts of in you. As a matter of fact, this word compassion in all of these verses, it is directly related to the word for womb. And so it conveys this idea of God being deeply moved as a mother is for her child. And this idea, this thought is impossible to explain, is impossible to put into words. If you are a parent, you know. I often make the joke that my two daughters have, it's a half joke, that my two daughters have done more for me than I ever have for them. Because the truth is, when I think about them, yesterday we were on our Sabbath, and I get to let my wife sleep in, and I get to the morning with the girls. And I get to speak, and I get to just sit there, and my phone is nowhere near, and I get to just be with them. And in that moment, I cannot express to you what I feel. You cannot put into words what it is like to have both of my daughters in my arms. I literally cannot explain it to you. And God, in Isaiah, he says, can a mother forget the baby at her breast and have no compassion on the child she has born? Compassion, that's the word. Can she have no rahum on the child she is born? Though she may forget, I will not forget you. God feels towards humanity and towards you as a mother and her child. I need you to know today that you need to have no doubt that when you come to God, that when you approach God, you need to have no doubt about how he sees you, about how he looks at you. And I need you to hear this today, that even when you mess up, that even when you fail, even when you abandon him, it does not matter for how long. It does not matter what you did or what you've done. But when you turn to him, when you seek him, the way he sees you, the way he looks at you is not disappointment. It is not anger. It is compassion. It is a deep moving of who he is. It is rahum. It is deep love and compassion for you and humanity, because that is who he is. Is not just what he does, so you can't change him. It is who he is to the deepest parts of him. That is who God is. And today I want to invite you to rest in that. Somebody needs that today. We probably all do. The second thing I want you to take with you today, the first, God is moved by compassion for us. The second thing is God gives grace to those who don't deserve it. God gives grace to those who don't deserve it. The word used for gracious or grace in all of these verses that we're reading today is this word hen. And what this word is saying is it means delightful, or it can mean also favorable. For example, in the Psalms, it is said that an incredible poet has lips of hen. Or for example, in the Proverbs, it says that a gem on a necklace is an ornament of hen. And it's painting this picture. And often it's wanting to convey and talks about this idea of this beautiful, marvelous, costly gift that is given with favor and delight. That's what it is trying to convey. And there are two aspects of this gift that seem contradictory but are so important to know. The first is that it is costly. And the second, that it is free. The first, that it is so great and beautiful and magnificent and incredible. It is costly, but it is also completely free, completely and solely based upon the character of the one who gives the gift. As a pastor, I often talk to many people, but often I find that I talk to two people that are honestly harder to counsel pastorally. The first person is the person that is so caught up in what they've done and who they have been that they are 100% convinced that God will never have anything to do with them. That they could never forgive themselves, and God will never forgive them. They are convinced that they have no place in God, His people, the church. The second are people who believe that their forgiveness was easy. That it did not take much to forgive them. And the truth is, both miss it. Both miss what this gift truly and really is. I want to give you a picture of this. Jesus, while he was on earth, he was followed around by religious leaders. And he was preaching, and he was doing things, and he was doing miracles, and he was doing all of these things. And these religious leaders would follow him around, and they would say, "Give us a sign. Give us a sign that you are who you say you are. Give us a sign that you are God." And so one of these times, Jesus answered them. He stopped, he turned around. It's in Matthew, and he answered them. And let me read to you his answer. They're saying, "Give me a sign that you are God, that you are who you say you are." And Jesus turns, and he answered, "A wicked and adulterous generation," I love Jesus, "asks for a sign, but none will be given it except the sign of the prophet Jonah. For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of a fish, so the Son of Man will be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth." You got to see what Jesus is doing right here. You got to see what he's up to in the story. In this picture, you see a wicked generation, don't you? You see Jonah, don't you? You see on one side people asking Jesus, "Prove to me that you are God. Show to me that you are God." And then you have Jesus, and he says, "Okay, I will. I will show you that I am this God. That I am this God who is compassionate and gracious. And I will show you that I am this God by spending 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. And you will believe, not only because this will be miraculous, but because it will be the perfect and total and highest display of who God is. And I want you to see today that on the cross, in the death, in the burial and resurrection of Jesus, we get the highest display on earth of this God who is gracious and compassionate. We've got this God who was so deeply moved that he came and gave his life. He paid the highest price. He paid it all. We could never earn it, and we could never deserve it. But what he did is he took on the cross in his death, burial, and resurrection, he took what you, what me, and the Ninevites all deserved. He paid every sin, every failure, every mistake, every form of evil. He paid it all completely and totally. He did it. And this gift is completely free to you. All you have to do is receive it. He, God, left the perfection of the heavens to come to earth. He paid the highest price. And in Jesus, we see this God who Moses was saying, I want to see your glory. Can I know who you are? In Jesus, we have this God put skin and bones on and be seen, be known, be touched. He says, I will give you no sign but the sign of Jonah. And so as the band comes up, I want to begin to close. I want to ask you today, how do you need to respond? How do you need to respond to who God is? Could it be that maybe you are in the room today and you've forgotten the price of this grace? You've forgotten the price of your forgiveness. Maybe things have gotten stale, uninteresting. Maybe it's just church going through the motions. Maybe it's just singing the song, listening to the guy talk, and going home. Have we forgotten the value, the beauty, and the greatness of this gem, of this grace, of the price that was paid for our forgiveness? Could it be that maybe you're here and maybe you feel like a failure? Maybe you feel like you're full of shame. You're struggling with guilt. You're struggling with how God sees you. You wonder, how does God actually see me right now, today? I want to invite you, as we're going to take a few moments and we are going to worship together and we are going to do communion together. I want to invite you. Maybe you don't sing for a moment, but maybe you just stand still and you allow God to reset your picture of who He is. If you were to close your eyes right now and you were to picture God looking at you, How is he seeing you? What's his face like? Is he frowning? Is he disappointed? I can tell you today who he is. He is a gracious and compassionate God who paid the highest price because he was deeply moved by love and compassion for you. That is who he was. That is who he is right now in this very moment.